A successful CEO invites his ex-girlfriend to his wedding as an act of revenge, but her unexpected arrival turns his perfect day into a nightmare that exposes a web of lies and completely shatters his world. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Rachel's voice carried a note of concern as she watched Michael add another name to their wedding invitation list. Trust me, Michael replied, his fingers tracing the embossed letters of Emily Collins' name. It's perfect. His trademark smirk, the one that had graced countless magazine covers, played across his face as he imagined her reaction to receiving the invitation. The penthouse office of Warren Technologies commanded a stunning view of the Manhattan skyline, but Michael's attention remained fixed on the cream-colored envelope before him. 6 years had passed since Emily walked out of his life, citing his endless work hours and emotional unavailability. Now, as one of the youngest tech CEOs on the Fortune 500 list, he would show her exactly what she had given up. Michael. Victoria Hammond's authoritative voice preceded her entrance. His longtime mentor strode into the office, her silver hair gleaming under the afternoon sun. The board meeting has been moved up to 4. She paused, noting the invitation in his hand. Ah, so you're going through with it? Wouldn't miss it for the world, Michael responded, his voice carrying an edge that made Rachel shift uncomfortably beside him. Emily always said I'd never find someone who could handle my dedication to success. Well, Rachel not only understands it, she embraces it. Rachel squeezed his shoulder, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I should head back to the foundation. We'll finish these tomorrow? As Rachel gathered her things, Victoria watched her leave before turning back to Michael. You know, revenge is a dish best served cold. In 6 years? That's practically frozen. Michael leaned back in his chair, memories washing over him unbidden. The tiny apartment they'd shared when he was still coding in his spare time. Emily's laughter as she brought him coffee during all-night programming sessions. The way her face crumpled when she finally walked out, his dismissive words about her neediness still hanging in the air between them. She gave up on us right when things were about to take off, he said, more to himself than Victoria. 3 months later, I landed our first major investor. Victoria's expression remained carefully neutral as she remembered the dozens of emails and voicemails she'd intercepted over the years. Messages from Emily that would never reach Michael. Sometimes people leave because they have to, not because they want to. Well, now she'll see exactly what she left behind. Michael slid Emily's invitation into its envelope with deliberate precision. 300 guests, the Plaza Hotel, and me, the man she said would never learn to balance success with love. And you're certain Rachel is comfortable with your guest list additions? Michael's laugh held no warmth. Rachel understands me. She knows this is about closure. He stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Besides, Emily probably won't even come. But if she does? His reflection smiled back at him, sharp and satisfied. She'll see I've become everything she said I couldn't be. Successful. Engaged. Happy. Victoria approached, standing beside him at the window. Just remember, Michael, sometimes the past is better left there. The past is exactly where it belongs, he agreed, not noticing the shadow that crossed Victoria's face. But first, I want her to see it. All of it. The empire she could have been part of. The life she threw away. The setting sun cast long shadows across the office as Victoria left, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Michael remained at the window, Emily's invitation still in his hand. In his mind, he could already picture her face when she opened it. The shock, the regret, the realization of all she had lost. What he couldn't picture, what he couldn't possibly know, was that his carefully orchestrated revenge was about to backfire in ways he never could have imagined. And that the empire he'd built his revenge upon was about to crumble at its very foundations. Behind him, Emily's invitation sat innocently on his desk, carrying not just an invitation to a wedding, but an unwitting summons to a truth that would shatter everything Michael Warren thought he knew about love, loss, and the true price of ambition. Mom? Christopher took my dinosaur again. Emily Collins balanced the stack of mail in one hand while using the other to push open the front door of their modest Boston townhouse. Christopher, what did we say about taking Alex's things without asking? 3 identical faces turned toward her, each wearing a distinctly different expression. Christopher, guilty but defiant, clutched a plastic T-Rex. Alex stood with arms crossed, the spitting image of righteous indignation. And Daniel, ever the peacemaker, was already moving to mediate between his brothers. But I needed it for my prehistoric habitat project, Christopher protested, his blue eyes, so like their father's, wide with earnest explanation. Emily set the mail down on the kitchen counter, mentally preparing for another round of sibling negotiations. At 6 years old, the boys were developing strong personalities that both delighted and exhausted her. "And did you ask?" The words died in her throat as she spotted it among the bills and flyers, a cream-colored envelope with silver embossing, addressed in elegant calligraphy to Ms. Emily Collins. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. After 6 years of silence, after countless unanswered emails and returned letters, Michael Warren had finally made contact, with a wedding invitation. "Mom?" Daniel's concerned voice broke through her shock. "Are you okay?" Your face went all funny. Emily forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetie. Now about that dinosaur." Later, after dinner was cleaned up and the boys were absorbed in their favorite cartoon show, Emily sat at her small desk in the corner of her bedroom. The invitation lay before her like a ticking bomb. She opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a worn folder. Inside were dozens of emails, all marked undeliverable, and letters returned with "no longer at this address" stamps, her desperate attempts to tell Michael about his children over the years. The first email was dated just days after she discovered she was pregnant. "Michael, we need to talk. It's important. Please call me." Then the letters sent to his office after his email seemed to stop working. "There's something you need to know. Something that will change everything. Please just give me 5 minutes." Each attempt met with silence. Eventually she'd stop trying. The boys needed her energy, her focus. Single motherhood left little room for solving mysteries about blocked communications. Emily glanced at the framed photo on her desk. The boys on their first day of kindergarten, 3 identical grins missing the same front teeth. They were the spitting image of Michael at that age. She'd seen enough of his childhood photos during their time together to know that. The invitation's elegant script swam before her eyes. "Mr. Michael Warren and Ms. Rachel Bennett request the honor of your presence." A bitter laugh escaped her. Honor? Was that what this was? Knowing Michael, this was carefully calculated, a chance to show off his success, to prove he'd moved on and up in the world. "Mommy?" Alex's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway in his rocket ship pajamas, looking concerned. "Why are you crying?" Emily quickly wiped her eyes, not having realized tears had fallen. "Just some grown-up stuff, baby. Come here." She pulled him onto her lap, breathing in the clean scent of his recently washed hair. "Is it about our dad?" Alex asked with the startling directness children sometimes possess. Emily's heart clenched. The boys had started asking more questions lately, noticing the other kids at school with their fathers. "Actually, yes, it is." Alex nodded solemnly. "Christopher says we must have a dad somewhere because that's how biology works. He learned about it in science class." Despite everything, Emily smiled. Christopher, their little scientist, always trying to solve life's mysteries through logic. Looking at Alex's face, at Michael's eyes looking back at her, Emily knew what she had to do. She couldn't let her sons grow up wondering. Couldn't let Michael continue in ignorance, whether that ignorance was willful or not. She reached for her phone, typing a quick response to the RSVP number. "Emily Collins accepts with pleasure." Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added, +3. She hit send before she could change her mind. It was time for the truth, all of it. Let Michael Warren have his perfect revenge wedding. She had a feeling it wasn't going to go quite the way he planned. "Mom?" Alex asked, studying her face. "Are you sure you're okay?" Emily hugged him closer, thinking of the chaos she was about to unleash. "I'm not sure, baby, but I think we're about to be. +3? Michael's voice carried across the plaza's opulent private dining room. "What does she mean, +3? Victoria's hand froze momentarily as she lifted her wine glass. "Perhaps she's bringing family for support? At my wedding?" Michael's laugh drew Rachel's attention from across the room, where she was greeting early arrivals for the rehearsal dinner. "That's rich. She probably hired escorts just to prove she's moved on too." The satisfaction in his voice made Victoria's stomach turn. She'd thought herself so clever 6 years ago, intercepting those messages. It had seemed the right choice at the time. Michael was on the verge of his biggest breakthrough, and a pregnancy would have derailed everything. But now, Michael. Rachel appeared at his elbow, her designer dress a perfect complement to the room's decor. "Can we talk? Privately?" He followed her to a quiet corner, leaving Victoria to her growing dread. "What's going on with you?" Rachel asked, her voice low but intense. "Ever since her RSVP arrived, you've been different. Almost obsessed." "It's nothing," Michael replied, but his eyes kept drifting to his phone, checking the guest list updates. Just wanting everything to be perfect. Perfect? Or perfectly cruel? Rachel's words cut through his satisfaction like a blade. Don't think I haven't noticed how you keep talking about showing her what she lost. This isn't about closure at all, is it? Before Michael could respond, Victoria called everyone to their seats for the rehearsal dinner. As he guided Rachel to their place at the head table, he caught sight of the seating chart, Emily's name assigned to a table with a clear view of the happy couple. Across town, in a modest hotel room, Emily knelt before her 3 boys, straightening their collars with trembling hands. "Remember what we talked about," she said, looking each son in the eye. "Tomorrow is going to be different. There will be lots of people and we have to be on our best behavior," Daniel finished, ever the responsible one. "And not mention anything about Dad until you say so," Alex added. Christopher, typically buried in a science book, looked up with unusual seriousness. "But Mom, once people see us, won't they know? Mrs. Peterson at school said we look just like our school pictures from when she taught first grade 20 years ago, and she didn't even know our dad went to." "Shoo," Emily pressed a finger to his lips, smiling despite her nervousness. "That's tomorrow's problem. Tonight we need to get some sleep." Back at the plaza, the rehearsal dinner was winding down. Michael stood to give his practice speech about love and second chances, his eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph as he mentioned how some people teach us what we don't want in life, leading us to what we do. Rachel watched him with growing unease, seeing not the man she'd agreed to marry, but someone else, someone cold and calculating. Victoria drank more wine than usual, her typical poise slipping just enough for those paying attention to notice. "To my beautiful bride," Michael concluded, raising his glass. "And to tomorrow, a day that will certainly be memorable for everyone involved." Victoria nearly choked on her wine. Later that night, in their separate spaces, 4 people lay awake, each haunted by the coming day. Michael, in his penthouse, scrolled through old photos of Emily on his phone, his satisfaction at his planned revenge mingling uncomfortably with memories he thought he'd buried. Rachel, in her family's Upper East Side apartment, stared at her engagement ring and wondered if she really knew the man she was about to marry. Victoria, in her townhouse, pulled out a locked drawer filled with 6 years' worth of intercepted messages, each one a ticking time bomb she tried to defuse. And Emily, lying between her sleeping sons in the hotel room, Christopher's science book still open on his chest, Alex clutching his dinosaur, Daniel's hand reaching for his brother's even in sleep, whispered a quiet prayer into the darkness. "Please let this be the right thing to do." In the quiet hours before dawn, as the city that never sleeps hummed softly around them, each person's thoughts turned to the ceremony ahead. But none of them, not even Emily, could truly imagine how the next day would unfold. Not Michael in his arrogant certainty, not Rachel in her growing doubt, not Victoria in her guilty knowledge, and not Emily in her nervous determination. Tomorrow would change everything, and there would be no going back. The plaza's grand ballroom sparkled like a scene from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across 300 of New York's elite, all turned expectantly toward the ornate double doors where Rachel would soon make her entrance. Michael stood at the altar, adjusting his cuff links, a nervous gesture masked as confidence. Victoria, seated in the front row, kept glancing toward the back of the room. No sign of Emily yet. Perhaps she wouldn't come after all. Perhaps. The side door creaked open. Later, guests would describe the moment as something out of a movie. Emily Collins slipped in through the side entrance, trying to be discreet, but the 3 small boys with her made stealth impossible. Christopher immediately pointed at a massive flower arrangement, whispering loudly about its geometric structure. Alex stumbled on the carpet, causing a small commotion. Daniel, ever watchful, tried to shush them both. The whispers started immediately. "Look at those children. Is that? They look exactly like. My God, those eyes." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. The boys were carbon copies of the childhood photos that hung in Michael's office. The same piercing blue eyes, the same angular jaw, even the same cowlick in their dark hair. At the altar, Michael remained oblivious, his back to the growing commotion. But Rachel, waiting in the foyer for her cue, could see everything through the crack in the door. She watched as the identical boys were hurriedly ushered into a pew, their features so strikingly familiar that there could be no mistake about their parentage. The wedding planner, flustered by the unexpected arrival, gave the signal. Wagner's bridal chorus began to play. Rachel's father squeezed her arm, ready to walk her down the aisle. But Rachel stood frozen, her eyes fixed on Michael's satisfied smirk. In that moment, Everything clicked into place. His obsession with inviting Emily, his constant talk of showing her what she'd lost, his thinly veiled excitement about her attendance. "I can't," Rachel whispered, stepping back. "This whole wedding, it's not about us at all." "Sweetheart?" her father asked, concerned. "It's about revenge." Rachel's voice grew stronger. "He invited his ex here to hurt her, Dad. To show off. To..." She looked again at the three boys, their presence answering questions she hadn't even known to ask. "I won't be part of this." The music played on, but no bride appeared. At the altar, Michael's confidence began to crack. He turned, scanning the room, and for the first time noticed the strange tension in the air. The whispers. The stares. And then, finally, he saw them. 3 pairs of eyes. His eyes. Looking back at him from small faces that could have been pulled from his own childhood albums. "No," he whispered. The music stuttered to a stop. Emily stood, her hand protectively on Christopher's shoulder. The boy was clutching a small science book. The same way Michael used to carry his programming manuals everywhere. "I tried to tell you," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "For 6 years I tried to tell you." Michael staggered slightly, gripping the altar for support. That's not possible." "Actually," Christopher piped up, unable to contain himself even in this moment, "it's not just possible, it's genetically fascinating. We learned about identical triplets in science class. The chances are approximately..." "Christopher," Emily gently quieted him, but not before a ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the crowd. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Michael, I can explain." "Explain what?" Rachel's voice cut through the chaos. She stood in the doorway, her wedding dress a stark contrast to her fierce expression. "Explain why my fiancé turned our wedding into a revenge plot? Or explain why these boys look exactly like him?" Michael's world tilted on its axis. He looked from Rachel's angry tears to Emily's quiet dignity to Victoria's guilty face, but his eyes kept being drawn back to the 3 boys. Alex, who held himself with the same defensive pride Michael remembered from his own childhood. Daniel, watching everything with careful calculation. And Christopher, practically vibrating with scientific facts he wanted to share. His sons. He had sons. The truth hit him like a physical blow. 6 years. 6 years of their lives he had missed. 6 years of first words, first steps, first everything, gone. And for what? For his career? For his stupid, petty revenge? "I saved every letter," Emily said quietly. "Every email. Every voicemail. Somehow they never reached you." Her eyes flicked to Victoria, understanding dawning in her expression. Victoria backed away, her perfectly maintained facade cracking. "You were on the verge of everything you'd worked for. A baby, babies, they would have ruined everything. You knew." Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "All this time you knew?" Rachel laughed, a harsh, hurt sound. "Well, I guess I should thank you all. Nothing like a wedding to bring out the truth." She turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, Michael, Emily didn't lose anything when she left you. But you lost everything." She walked out, her father hurrying after her. The guests began to stand, uncertain whether to leave or stay for what was quickly becoming the most talked about scandal of the season. But Michael barely noticed. He couldn't look away from his sons, his children, who were studying him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. In Christopher's analytical gaze, Daniel's cautious observation, and Alex's barely concealed excitement, he saw himself reflected back threefold. "Hi," he managed, his voice cracking. I'm our dad," Alex finished, his face breaking into a grin that was pure Emily. "We know. We look just like your pictures." And in that moment, as Michael stared into 3 pairs of eyes that matched his own, he realized that his carefully planned revenge had backfired in the most cosmic way possible. He had set out to show Emily everything she had lost, only to discover everything he had lost instead. Tech CEO's wedding disaster. Secret triplets revealed. Warren Technology stock plunges 15% amid CEO scandal. Revenge wedding backfires. Millionaire meets children he never knew existed. The headlines screamed across every news site and social media platform. Michael sat in his darkened office, scrolling through the endless coverage. Each new notification felt like another nail in the coffin of his carefully constructed image. His phone buzzed again, another call from the board. He ignored it just like the previous 12. Instead, his eyes were fixed on a photo someone had managed to snap. 3 small boys being rushed into a waiting car, Emily shielding them from the cameras. His sons. The words still felt foreign in his mind. A knock at his door broke through his daze. "Go away," he called out, but the door opened anyway. Emily stepped in, looking as exhausted as he felt. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "The boys are asking questions. Real questions now, not just theoretical ones. They deserve answers." Michael gestured helplessly at the chaos surrounding him. "What am I supposed to tell them? That their father was too busy building an empire to notice their existence? That he was so focused on revenge he didn't even—" His voice broke. "Tell them the truth," Emily said quietly. "That you didn't know. But I should have known." The words exploded out of him as he yanked open his desk drawer, pulling out a stack of papers. "Look at these. All the emails you sent bounced back as undeliverable. Every letter marked return to sender. 6 years of you trying to reach me, and somehow I never questioned why my ex-girlfriend had completely vanished." Emily picked up one of the returned letters, her own handwriting stark against the red stamp. "I thought you were ignoring me. That you'd chosen your company over." She paused, a new understanding dawning. "Wait, how did you get these?" "These were returned to my address." Michael's laugh was hollow. "Apparently Victoria kept quite the collection. Her resignation letter this morning led me to a locked drawer in her office. 6 years of intercepted communications, all carefully archived." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "She protected me from the distraction of fatherhood. Kept me focused on the company. On success. Your mentor," Emily said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "She was the one who always said your dedication to work was your best quality. She's gone now. Disappeared. Left everything except those letters and a note saying she did what she thought was best for the company." He looked up at Emily, his eyes red-rimmed. "For the company. Not for me. Not for you. And certainly not for them." Emily sank into a chair, the weight of the revelation hitting her. "All those times I thought you were just ignoring us. I could have tried harder. Found another way." "Don't," Michael said sharply. "Don't you dare blame yourself. I'm the one who created an environment where Victoria thought this was acceptable. I'm the one who was so obsessed with success that people assumed I wouldn't want my own children." His computer pinged with another stock alert. Another drop. The empire he'd built was crumbling, but for the first time he couldn't bring himself to care. "The boys," he said suddenly, looking at Emily with desperate intensity. "Tell me about them. Please. I've missed so much." Emily's expression softened slightly. "Christopher's our scientist. He has to understand how everything works. Alex is the adventurous one. He's never met a challenge he didn't want to tackle. And Daniel, he's the peacemaker. Wise beyond his years." "Like you," Michael said softly. "Like you," Emily corrected. "That analytical mind, that drive to understand things. That's all you." Another series of notifications lit up Michael's phone. More missed calls from the board. More headlines. More damage to control. "I have to fix this," he said, not sure if he meant the company or his newfound family or both. "Yes," Emily agreed, standing to leave. "But this time maybe try fixing the right things first." She paused at the door. "They have a science fair next week. Christopher's project is on genetic inheritance. He'd probably love to have some new data to analyze." The invitation was clear, tentative as it was. Michael nodded, his throat tight. After Emily left, he walked to Victoria's office. The drawer she'd unlocked before disappearing still stood open, years of intercepted communication carefully filed by date. Each envelope, each printed email represented a moment he could never get back. His phone buzzed again. The board demanding an emergency meeting. His PR team begging for direction. His lawyers warning of potential shareholder lawsuits. Michael turned off his phone. Instead, he picked up the earliest letter in Victoria's collection. The paper was worn at the creases as if someone had opened and read it many times over the years. Emily's handwriting flowed across the page. "Michael, there's something you need to know. Something that will change everything." He began to read. "You can't just show up at their school." Emily's voice echoed through Michael's penthouse office. "They barely know you exist." Michael paced by the windows, his suit jacket discarded, tie loosened. A week had passed since the wedding disaster, and the dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless nights. "They're my sons, Emily. My children. I've already missed 6 years." "Exactly," Emily cut in. 6 years. 6 birthdays. 6 Christmases. You can't just rush in and expect." "I found this in Victoria's files," Michael interrupted, pulling out a grainy ultrasound image. "Our boys. Their first picture. She kept everything, Emily. Everything you tried to tell me. Emily's anger faltered at the sight of the ultrasound. That was the day I found out it was triplets. I was terrified, ecstatic, overwhelmed. She sank into a chair. I called your office 17 times that day. Tell me, Michael said quietly, sitting across from her. Tell me everything. Please. Emily stared out at the Manhattan skyline, gathering her thoughts. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I left. I tried calling, but your number was suddenly disconnected. Emails bounced back. When I went to your office, the security guard said you'd given strict instructions not to let me up. Victoria, Michael breathed. She changed my number that week, said it was because too many competitors had it. The security protocol was her idea too. I wrote letters. Sent them to every address I could find. Each one came back. Emily's laugh was bitter. I even tried reaching out to tech magazines doing profiles on you, hoping they'd pass along a message. Nothing worked. And then I had 3 babies who needed me more than they needed a father who seemed determined not to be found. Emily's voice hardened. I went back to teaching. Moved in with my sister until I could afford our own place. Learned how to be both mom and dad. Michael flinched at her words. The boys, how are they handling all this? Christopher's been researching genetic inheritance patterns. Alex keeps asking if you know how to play baseball. And Daniel? Emily hesitated. Daniel's worried you'll hurt us again. I would never. Wouldn't you? Emily's eyes flashed. You invited me to your wedding just to hurt me, Michael? To show off your success, your perfect life. What kind of person does that? The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. A horrible one, he admitted. A selfish, vindictive person who didn't deserve to know he had 3 amazing sons. Silence filled the room, heavy with 6 years of lost moments. Yesterday, Emily said finally, Christopher asked if you'd help him with his science fair project. Alex wanted to know if you ever played Little League. Even Daniel mentioned that his friend's divorced dad comes to all his soccer games. Hope flickered in Michael's chest, but Emily held up a hand. They're curious about you. That's natural. But they're also scared. Confused. They don't understand why their father never wanted them. But I did want them. Michael stood abruptly. I would have wanted them. If I'd known. Would you? Emily challenged. The Michael I knew back then? The one who worked 18-hour days and missed every dinner date? The one who said children would be a distraction from success? She shook her head. Maybe Victoria did exactly what you would have wanted. The words landed like arrows, each one finding its mark. Michael slumped back into his chair, remembering his younger self with shame. I was wrong, he whispered. About everything. Emily's expression softened slightly. Prove it. How? Start small. The science fair is next Thursday. Christopher's presenting at 2 p.m. Don't just show up. Ask if you can come. Respect their boundaries. Earn their trust. Michael nodded, hope and fear warring in his chest. And you? Can I ever earn back your trust? This isn't about me, Emily said, standing to leave. It's about 3 little boys who've spent 6 years wondering why they weren't enough to make their father want to know them. She paused at the door. By the way, Daniel has a soccer game tomorrow at 4. He's the goalie. If someone were to sit quietly in the stands, not approaching, just watching, it might be a good first step. After she left, Michael walked to his private bathroom and stared at his reflection. The face looking back at him was one he barely recognized anymore. The polished, ruthless CEO had been replaced by something else. Something more human, more vulnerable. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with another board meeting reminder. On his desk, acquisition papers waited for his signature. The empire he'd built still needed him. But for the first time in his life, Michael Warren had found something more important than success. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. Clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon. And find out where I can buy a kid's soccer jersey. Size small. The soccer ball sailed past Daniel's outstretched hands and into the goal. From his place in the stands, Michael fought the urge to shout encouragement to his dejected son. Emily's words echoed in his mind, start small. Respect their boundaries. So he sat quietly, the small soccer jersey still in its shopping bag beside him, and watched Daniel pick himself up and get ready for the next play. After the game, he noticed Christopher sitting on the sidelines, nose buried in a book about DNA sequencing, while Alex practiced penalty kicks against the empty net. 3 such different boys, each remarkable in his own way. You came. Michael turned to find Emily standing behind him. Of course I came. Daniel noticed. He kept looking up here between plays. He's a good goalkeeper, Michael said. That last save was incredible. He only started playing because the team needed someone calm under pressure. Emily sat down beside him. The coach says he's never seen a kid read the game so well. Michael nodded, recognizing his own analytical nature in his son's strategic play. And Christopher? That's quite the advanced reading material he's got there. He wants to be a genetic researcher. Study multiple births. Emily's lips twitched. Can't imagine why. The science fair project is about inherited traits in identical multiples. He's been begging me to ask if... Emily hesitated. If you'd share your medical history. For research purposes, of course. Michael's heart leaped. I could do better than that. Warren Technologies has a genetics division. I could take him on a tour, show him the labs. Small steps, Emily reminded him gently. Maybe start with helping him gather his data? The next afternoon found Michael sitting awkwardly at Emily's kitchen table while Christopher solemnly recorded his father's physical characteristics in a worn notebook. Your eye color is exactly azure blue, according to the standard genetic marking chart, Christopher announced, all business. Just like ours. And you have the same attached earlobes. Fascinating. Is it? Michael asked, trying to match his son's scientific tone. Oh yes. The probability of identical triplets sharing all these specific markers with their biological father creates an exponential pattern that's quite statistically significant. Christopher pushed his glasses up his nose. Also, you do the same thing with your left eyebrow when you're thinking hard. From the living room, Alex called out, ask him about the baseball thing. Christopher sighed with the patience of a long-suffering scientist interrupted by less academic pursuits. Alex wants to know if you played baseball as a kid. Actually, Michael said carefully, I was a pitcher. Made it to state finals in high school. There was a crash from the living room as Alex abandoned whatever he was doing and rushed in. Really? Mom says I throw just like you, but she never saw you play, but I'm the best pitcher in Little League, and coach says. Alex, Emily's warning voice came from the doorway. Remember what we talked about? Alex deflated slightly, but his eyes still shone with excitement. Right. Sorry. Small steps. Michael's chest ached with everything he'd missed. I mean, if it's okay with your mom, maybe we could play catch sometime? The hope that blazed across Alex's face was almost painful to see. Perhaps, Emily said, but her voice was softer than before. After Christopher's science fair, Daniel, who had been silently watching from the doorway, spoke up. Will you really come to that? If Christopher wants me to, Michael answered, looking at his scientist son. Christopher adjusted his glasses again. Well, it would be helpful to have the primary source present to verify the data. For scientific accuracy. Michael was learning to recognize when his sons were saying more than their words conveyed. The afternoon stretched into early evening as Christopher cataloged every hereditary trait he could think to measure. Alex chimed in with baseball statistics he thought might be genetically relevant. Even Daniel gradually moved from the doorway to the table, occasionally offering quiet observations about shared mannerisms he'd noticed. When Michael finally stood to leave, his suit wrinkled from hours at the kitchen table, Christopher surprised everyone by hugging him impulsively. Thanks for the data, he mumbled into Michael's jacket before quickly pulling away, embarrassed by his own display of emotion. Anytime, Michael managed, his voice rough. I'm pretty interested in the results of your research. That night, alone in his penthouse, Michael looked through the photos Emily had shared of the boys' earlier years. Their first steps. First words. First day of school. He hadn't earned these memories, but she'd given them to him anyway. His phone buzzed, another crisis at the office demanding his attention. But for the first time in his life, Michael Warren had something more important to think about than stock prices and board meetings. He had a science fair to prepare for. The board has lost confidence in your leadership. The words hung in the air of the Warren Technologies conference room. Your personal scandal has cost us 3 major contracts. Our stock has dropped 20%. Investors are nervous. Michael sat at the head of the table, his usual power position feeling hollow as board members listed his failures. Through the glass walls, he could see employees trying not to stare while pretending to work. And your solution? He asked quietly. Step down as CEO. Temporarily, of course. Just until this blows over. Michael looked down at his phone, where a text from Emily waited. Christopher's presenting at 2 p.m. Don't be late. No, he said. No. The board chairman's eyebrows shot up. This isn't a request, Michael. The shareholders. Need to understand that things are going to change around here. Michael stood, buttoning his jacket. I've been thinking about what went wrong. Not just with the wedding but with everything. He walked to the window, looking out at the empire he'd built. We have no parental leave policy. No flexible hours for family emergencies. No childcare support. He turned back to the board. We created a culture where someone like Victoria thought hiding my children from me was doing me a favor. This is hardly the time. It's exactly the time, Michael cut in. I'm not stepping down. I'm stepping up. Starting today, Warren Technologies is implementing the most comprehensive family support program in the tech industry. The board erupted in protests about costs and timing, but Michael held up his hand. I have a science fair to attend, he said, checking his watch. But when I return, we're going to discuss how to make this company one that my sons could be proud to inherit one day. He left them sputtering and rushed to his office, where a fresh suit waited. He'd learned to keep one handy for days split between board meetings and school events. His assistant caught him at the elevator. Sir, the Asian market is opening soon. With everything that's happened. Cancel my evening calls, Michael said, straightening his tie. And draft a company-wide email about the new Family First initiatives. Pull data from those Nordic companies we studied last quarter. But sir, the shareholders will understand that a company's true value isn't just in its stock price. He stepped into the elevator. It's in its values. The drive to Christopher's school gave him time to reflect on how much had changed. 2 weeks ago, his biggest concern had been orchestrating the perfect revenge. Now, he parked next to Emily's modest car, noticing the baseball gear in the back seat and the soccer cleats on the floor. Evidence of the busy, beautiful life his sons had lived without him. Inside the school gymnasium, science fair projects lined the walls. He found Christopher's display easily. It was the most professional-looking one there, with detailed charts showing genetic markers across multiple generations. You came, Christopher said, trying to hide his relief behind scientific detachment. I was worried a meeting might run late. Nothing's more important than this, Michael replied, and meant it. As Christopher launched into his presentation about inherited traits in multiple births, Michael noticed something. In the family tree section under Father, Christopher had carefully printed his name, Michael Warren. Not unknown or absent anymore. It was a small change. But sometimes small changes were the most meaningful ones. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. Probably the board having collective apoplexy over his announcements. The Asian markets would be reacting to the scandal. Shareholders would be demanding explanations. But Michael was too busy learning about dominant and recessive genes from his brilliant son to care. Later, after Christopher won first place, of course I did, the data was statistically significant. Michael returned to his office. The emails had piled up, the crisis hadn't magically resolved itself, and there were still plenty of fires to put out. He sat at his desk, looking at the spot where he'd once placed Emily's wedding invitation with such vindictive glee. Now that space held a copy of Christopher's project results, complete with a hand-drawn chart showing all the ways his sons took after him. Michael Warren had built his company by focusing solely on success. He'd lost his family by prioritizing revenge. But maybe, just maybe, he could save both by finally understanding what really mattered. He opened his laptop and began drafting a new mission statement for Warren Technologies. It started with a simple truth that had taken him far too long to learn. Family isn't just about DNA. It's about choices. The Warren Foundation for Family Support. Emily read from the press release, her expression carefully neutral. That's quite a name. I wanted to call it the Collins Foundation, Michael admitted, watching Alex and Daniel play catch in her small backyard. But you said. Small steps, they finished together. It had been 6 weeks since the wedding that wasn't. 6 weeks of Michael learning to balance board meetings with baseball games, quarterly reports with science experiments, and shareholder calls with soccer practice. How much did this cost you? Emily asked, gesturing at the press release detailing the foundation's comprehensive support for single parents. Everything from childcare subsidies to job training. Less than I spent on that wedding. Michael watched as Christopher joined his brothers, his ever-present notebook in hand as he recorded their throwing speeds. Besides, the money doesn't matter. Since when? Since I realized I had 3 sons growing up in a tiny apartment while I had 4 empty guest rooms in my penthouse. He met her eyes. Since I understood what you went through alone. Emily's expression softened slightly. The boys mentioned you're selling the penthouse. Michael nodded. It's too much space for one person. The foundation can use the money better. He hesitated. I found a smaller place. Still in Manhattan, but closer to here. Before Emily could respond, Alex's excited shout drew their attention. Dad. Watch this pitch. The word, Dad, still hit Michael like a physical force every time he heard it. He turned to watch, clapping when Alex's fastball hit Daniel's mitt with perfect accuracy. Your form is improving, he called out, then caught himself and glanced at Emily. Sorry, I know I should wait for them to. It's okay, she interrupted softly. They're the ones choosing to call you Dad now. Inside, Michael's phone buzzed for the 10th time that hour. The board was meeting tomorrow to vote on his leadership. His reduced schedule and new initiatives had rattled investors, and there was serious talk of forcing him out. I have to head back to the office, he said reluctantly. Board meeting prep. I heard things are tough, Emily said. The business channels can't stop talking about Warren Technologies' dramatic shift in corporate culture. They think I'm having a breakdown, Michael chuckled. Apparently, prioritizing families over profits is a sign of instability. Are you going to lose the company? Maybe. He stood, straightening his jacket. But I won't lose them. Not again. As if on cue, Christopher ran up, waving his notebook. Dad. I calculated the statistical correlation between practice time and Alex's pitch accuracy. Want to see the graph? 20 minutes later, Michael was officially late for his meeting, but he'd learned everything there was to know about his son's latest research project. The next day he stood before the board again. The same conference room, the same disapproving faces, but a very different Michael Warren. The numbers don't lie, the chairman said. These new policies are costly. Your reduced hours are affecting operations. And this foundation. He shook his head. The shareholders are calling for a change in leadership. Michael placed 3 photos on the table, one from each son's recent activities. Do you know what these are? Mr. Warren, this isn't about. These are moments I almost missed. Again. He pointed to each picture. Christopher's science fair victory. Alex's game-winning pitch. Daniel's first goal as striker. He looked around the table. I won't miss any more moments. Not for this company, not for any company. Then you leave us no choice. No, Michael said calmly. I'm leaving you a choice. Keep me as CEO, and let me build a company that values family as much as profits. Or fire me and I'll take my new family-first business model to our competitors. He smiled. I hear they're very interested in how our employee satisfaction scores have skyrocketed since implementing the new policies. Later that evening he sat in Emily's living room, helping Daniel with his math homework while Alex practiced pitching in the yard and Christopher updated his ongoing genetic research. The board backed down, he told Emily quietly. Turns out happy employees are good for business. Who knew? And the foundation? Launches next month. We're starting with a pilot program for single parents in Boston. He paused. I was hoping you might consider running it. Emily looked surprised. Me? Who better? You lived it. You know what people really need. He rushed on before she could respond. You'd have complete autonomy. I'd have no direct involvement beyond funding. Just think about it. She studied him for a long moment. You really have changed, haven't you? Not enough. Not yet. He helped Daniel solve another equation. But I'm trying. Dad. Christopher called from the kitchen. Can you look at my new data set? Michael stood, catching Emily's small smile at the domestic scene they'd somehow created. It wasn't perfect. There were still boundaries, still wounds healing. But it was real. And real was better than perfect. Coming, son, he called back. Show me what you've discovered. Mr. Warren? His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The transition team needs your signature on. It'll have to wait, Michael replied, already grabbing his coat. I've got a school play to attend. 3 months had passed since the failed wedding. The media had moved on to fresher scandals, the stock price had stabilized, and Michael had surprised everyone by voluntarily stepping down as CEO. He'd remain on the board, but his days of 18-hour workweeks were over. The elementary school auditorium was packed with parents clutching programs for The Wizard of Oz. Daniel had landed the role of the Tin Man, a fact his brothers teased him about mercilessly while secretly being proud. You made it, Emily said as he slid into the saved seat beside her. I wasn't sure with the transition meetings. I told them family commitments were non-negotiable. Michael spotted Christopher and Alex in the front row, the latter fidgeting with his Munchkin costume while the former appeared to be taking research notes on theatrical performance metrics. The lights dimmed and Daniel appeared on stage. His painted silver face couldn't hide his nervous smile as he searched the audience. When he found his parents sitting together, his whole posture relaxed. "Heart or no heart," he delivered his line perfectly, "they're my family now." Michael felt Emily's hand brush against his briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the moment's deeper meaning. After the show, as Daniel basked in his brother's enthusiastic reviews, "Your Rust dance was scientifically accurate," declared Christopher. Michael's phone buzzed with an urgent board message. He declined the call. The next morning found him in the park, surrounded by 3 bikes with training wheels and 3 increasingly frustrated boys. "The physics should be simple," Christopher muttered, consulting the notebook where he'd drawn diagrams of centripetal force and balance equations. Yet practical application proves challenging. "Less thinking, more doing," Alex insisted, already sporting a scraped knee from his previous attempt. Daniel hung back, watching his brother's attempts with characteristic caution. "Like this," Michael demonstrated, holding the back of Christopher's bike. "Trust the momentum. I won't let go until you're ready." One by one the boys found their balance. Alex, naturally athletic, got it first. Christopher followed, his scientific approach finally giving way to instinct. Daniel took longer, but his careful practice paid off in the smoothest ride of all. "Dad," they called in unison as they wobbled in wobbly circles. "Look." Michael recorded every moment, sending the videos to Emily, who had a parent-teacher conference that morning. She replied with a string of heart emojis, a far cry from their carefully formal communications of just months ago. "Ready to try without training wheels?" he asked as they caught their breath on a bench. "Already calculated the increased risk factor," Christopher reported. "Acceptable within standard safety parameters." "Bring it on." Alex punched the air. Daniel simply nodded, quiet determination in his eyes. As Michael knelt to remove the first set of training wheels, he remembered other fathers and sons in the park, from days when he was too busy with acquisitions and mergers to notice their joy. How many moments like this had he missed, thinking success meant something else entirely? His phone buzzed again, another board message about the company's future. A future he'd once thought was the only thing that mattered. "Dad." Daniel's voice pulled him back. "Are you sure you won't let go?" Michael looked at his son's trusting face, so different from the wary expression he'd worn just months ago. "Not until you're ready," he promised. "And not without warning." "That's good data," Christopher approved, making a note. "Last one to the fountain is a rotten egg," Alex challenged, already pushing off. Michael spent the rest of the morning running alongside 3 wobbling bikes, his Italian leather shoes scuffed beyond repair, his suit streaked with dirt and chain grease. His phone eventually fell silent, but he didn't notice. He was too busy watching his sons discover their balance, too invested in their triumph to think about anything else. As they sat sharing hot dogs from a cart later, Emily would disapprove of the nutrition, but some secrets were meant to be kept between fathers and sons. Michael realized something. 6 months ago, he'd invited Emily to his wedding hoping to show her everything she'd lost. Instead, she'd shown him everything he'd never known he had. "Dad." Christopher's voice broke into his thoughts. "I've been thinking about the statistical probability of multiple independent variables aligning to create an optimal outcome from an initially negative event." "He means it's good you didn't get married," Alex translated. "Really good," Daniel added softly. Michael looked at his sons, the scientist, the athlete, and the old soul, and felt the last pieces of his old life fall away. He didn't miss them. "Really, really good," he agreed and bought them all another hot dog. If this story resonated with you, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories.